How are Reform UK partaking in performative cruelty for political gain? Now, I have 7 reasons why I believe that they are, from direct humanitarian impact right up to vulnerability to exploitation when it comes to how Reform UK want to treat asylum seekers, and also why it will fail to stop asylum seekers being housed in their areas they have taken. Now, Reform UK it's gained significant local election victories last week, didn't they? With over 600 council seats and control of 10 local authorities. And it's planning to use legal challenges such as judicial reviews and injunctions to prevent migrants from being housed in areas under their control. Now, party chairman and the water carrier for the racist, Zia Yusuf, while getting his belly tickled by Laura Kunsberg, acknowledged that local councils have limited powers compared to Westminster, but stated that they would use every instrument of power available, including judicial reviews, injunctions, challenges based on planning laws and budget allocation tactics. Now, their newly Greater Lincolnshire elected mayor, the not-so-damely Dame Andrea Jenkyns, has been particularly vocal on this approach, advocating for tent, not rent, for asylum seekers and criticising what she calls soft-touch Britain. Yeah. The strategy appears to involve challenging the Home Office Authority by arguing that converting hotels into migrant housing violates various regulations, and Reform UK plans to release more detailed plans for deportation in the coming weeks. It's always the case, isn't it? Escape scrutiny by saying, we'll release detailed files in the coming weeks, and they never do they? And this approach seems to represent an attempt to use local government power as a platform for challenging national policies, particularly on immigration and asylum. And despite the Home Office having primary responsibility for housing adult asylum seekers. Now, this is where I think they are partaking in performative cruelty on 7 reasons, and there are, like I said earlier, their direct humanitarian impact. Moving people from hotels to tents would drastically worsen living conditions, especially in the UK's often cold, wet climate. Basic needs like shelter, warmth, hygiene facilities and privacy will be severely compromised. Then there's the psychological trauma. Many asylum seekers have already experienced significant trauma in their home countries and during their journeys, and being housed in tents and treated as unwelcome would compound existing mental health challenges, potentially leading to increased depression, anxiety and PTSD symptoms. And there's also the prolonged uncertainty. Legal challenges would create additional delays in an already lengthy asylum process, leaving people in limbo for extended periods without stability or the ability to rebuild their lives. And there's also the community hostility as well we've got to think about. The rhetoric around these policies could increase hostility and discrimination towards asylum seekers in local communities, potentially leading to isolation, fear, and even hate crimes. Then there's the access to services as well. People in temporary tent accommodations would likely face greater barriers to accessing healthcare, education, local support, and other essential services. And there's also family separation to think about as well. The unstable nature of tent housing could make it more difficult for families to stay together or maintain connections. And then there's finally back to the vulnerability of exploitation. People in more precarious living situations become more vulnerable to exploitation, including labour exploitation and trafficking. Now, they might say that this approach focuses on deterrence and expressing political opposition rather than addressing human needs and legal obligations to these seeking asylum, with real human costs for individuals who are often already in vulnerable situations. Now, I did a bit of reading to see if I could find whatever information I could possibly get, and From what I can gather, Reform UK's legal strategy faces significant challenges and limitations, and the likelihood of success does appear very low for several reasons, like limited legal grounds. The Home Office has clear statutory authority to house asylum seekers, and while councils can object, they have limited power to block these decisions outright. There's also a previous precedent, you could say, because back in 2021, 7 local authorities, including Labour-controlled Coventry City Council, attempted similar judicial review action against the Home Office's asylum dispersal policy. Now, that legal challenge was withdrawn after the Home Office promised a new, fairer asylum dispersal system, suggesting outright legal victories may be difficult to achieve. Then there's the procedural hurdles, because the Joint Committee on Human Rights document highlights how the government is actually working to limit judicial review powers through the Judicial Review and Courts Bill, potentially making such challenges even more difficult in the future. And there's also narrow technical arrangements as well, because reform strategy appears to focus on technical violations like planning regulations when hotels are converted to housing. Now, these types of challenges technically result in procedural adjustments rather than wholesale policy changes. Now, who knows what might happen, but there's certain things I thought that might be the reason, like delay and disruption tactics. While unlikely to completely prevent asylum housing, legal challenges could create significant delays and administrative burdens. Then there's also the symbolic victories. They might win minor concessions or procedural challenges that can be portrayed as political wins. And there's also political pressure. The real impact may be political rather than legal, creating public attention around this issue, which they do love a bit of refugee bashing, don't they, the Reform Party? So this strategy just seems designed more as a political tool to demonstrate opposition to government policy than a realistic mechanism to completely block asylum seeker housing in reform-controlled areas. Now, I'm not too sure saying the reason why your bins ain't getting emptied or why other public services are not running properly is the fault of DI or some imaginary asylum seekers in hotels from another part of the city is going to cut the mustard. Maybe it will. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe that's what you need to do now, when you're too lazy to run a council and don't really care about those who voted for you. It's to just blame vulnerable people seeking asylum and other vulnerable minorities. What do you guys think? Let me know down below. And if you enjoy everything, House of Commons, Select Committee meetings and anything political, please like and subscribe, and I shall bid you farewell and take care, my friends.